Hello, hello. Um, Back to talk with y'all about the kind of competitive complexities of Warhammer. The topic today that I'm trying to hit on is stratagems. I feel like stratagem usage and CP usage is a handicap for a lot of uh, kind of the intermediate 40k players that I interact with. Being able to use your command points wisely and get the most out of your stratagems is very important because your command points is just as much a resource that you have to spend over the course of the game as your units are. So knowing how to use them correctly is very important. Before I go much further, address the elephant in the room. I succumbed to peer pressure and tried to get myself a better camera and microphone. I swear to God, this is it. This is all. Okay? I have a life. No more upgrades. I'm not going to increase better graphics. In fact, my graphics got worse this video. So, take that. Anyway, um, I so kind of the key about stratagem usage is making sure that the expected value of the use of any given stratagem is more than the use that you'll get out of saving that command point or those command points for later. Just like any other part of deciding how to use resources in 40k, we're analyzing the value that we're going to get out of it and deciding if it's worth it. With damage strats, you can think to yourself, would my unit accomplish its goal without using this strat? Will it be able to do what it needs to do? With defensive durability based strats, thinking about what value your unit will get if it lives, how likely is it to live if the strat is used. With delivery based strats, thinking, does the stratagem unlock a new line of play? Does it make an important line of play much more consistent? These are the kind of things to think about. You'll notice that for the most part, all the stratagems in the game are going to benefit and work towards usually one main um, core pillar of competitive play that we talked about in my first video. Um, so deciding and analyzing how they fit into those game plans to decide if they're worth using is important to do. Um, Specifically thinking about whether the stratagem unlocks new play lines is really important. Does it unlock new whole strategies to pursue, or is it just making something that we're already doing a little bit better? Or does it not do any of that and it's actually not making anything that much better, and it's also not really unlocking that much more? I just really wanted my Lord of Change to live, so I rolled the 4 up again. That it's important to think about. The other thing to think about with stratagems is which strats gain value without their use. Having the threat of having a stratagem and being able to use it is often going to be the value that you get out of it. Saying, I have fight on death, your value that you get out of having that strat active most often is not going to be fighting on death and killing them. It's that you could fight on death, and so your opponent has to play around it. In that sense, you aren't actually having to spend a resource. You just have to make sure that you have that resource available, and your opponent has to play around it. There's a lot of stratagems in the game that fit this ticket, and the more CP that you have active going into your opponent's turn, and the more stratagems that you have to make their play lines awkward, the stronger position you can put yourself in on your following turn. I'm going to kind of talk about each of the global strats that everyone gets and my thoughts on them, and then we can kind of dive into um, the some of the categories that strats that everyone else might get and their detachments and their relative strength. And then I'll try to give you kind of a flow chart for what how you should think about using your stratagem and when you should decide if it's worth using or not. As far as global strats go, there's a few that fall into multiple of those, pillars. CP reroll is kind of the obvious one. I would say that CP reroll is really important to have if you are a melee army or you have melee units that need to make a charge. If that's the case, and the charge is not an automatic 2-3 inch charge, 4 inch charge maybe, um, you should have a command point in your pocket to reroll a charge. The best part about this is that it's something that you have but probably won't need, so you can save it. And if you're a melee army, if you do pass the charge, then you get to use that CP on offensive strats or defensive strats on the following turn. But having it available is really important, so make sure not to use it on something else before that. Otherwise, I would say that CP reroll is not incredibly relevant. I don't think you should really reroll damage. It's pretty rare that that's important. Maybe if you rolled a 1 on a damage die and you needed a 2 to blow something up with your very last resource that could attack into it, or if you have a unit that is able to fall back and act, or is going to do a lot of damage, or is going to regen a lot of health if it survives, and is going to continue affecting the game at a large rate, and you just need to roll like a 4-up invul to live, maybe that's worth it. But a lot of times people get in their heads like, oh, I could live if I re-roll this, when really it's actually fine if you die, but you need that stratagem, or you need that CP specifically later in the game. And people need to be just okay with letting a unit die, especially if they planned on having that unit die. If you spend a resource, if you're in passive play and you send a resource out to go accomplish a task and die, if it dies, that's cool. If it's tagged in combat and can't fall back and act, and you reroll it to live, and then you like kill a couple guys, and then you don't do anything, and then you die on the following turn, that's not really value. If you CP roll to live, but then you can't fall back without getting overwatched to die, that's also not value. So really think through if it's worth. Most of the time, it's not. And I think err on the side of don't reroll stuff except for charges. Um, Heroic Intervention is the next one. I would say Heroic Intervention is a very important strat. If you have fights first, it's extremely important. If you have fights first access and don't have a CP set aside for Heroic Intervention, your fight first unit is going to become a whole lot less relevant. So you need to have that set aside. If you don't have that, then it's still relevant to hold your expansion. Heroic Intervention is a delivery mechanism. It's also a durability mechanism. If you are able to, if a multi-unit or a multi-model unit charges one of yours and you heroic with a chaff unit, it can prevent a lot of models from activating. So setting that up and being aware of its relevance, very important. Counteroffensive, the interrupt, is one of those. Again, it's important to have the CP set aside. You might not use it. Your opponent might play around it such that you don't have to, but them playing around it is value that you get without having to spend a resource. It's going to be awkward for them to deal with, and they'll have a lot easier time if they don't have to do that. So if you are playing a melee mirror where both of you all have melee, specifically you have multiple units of that are melee focused, having the 2 CP interrupt on hand to discourage your opponent from trying to pick up 2 melee units at once, very important. Overwatch is interesting because I would say that if your unit is made to overwatch, if it has flamers and is in a position where it's going to get a lot of value, or if it like rerolls all hits with sustained hits or something like that, then yeah, save a CP for Overwatch. That's incredibly important. It's going to limit your opponent's play a lot and can potentially get you a lot of value. If your opponent is, or if your unit isn't made to Overwatch and just kind of can shoot, you could hit a 6. It has a good amount of shots. It's not crazy for you to hit a 6. Maybe it has sustained or lethal or something. I would say generally don't. Unless you need, unless it's going to swing the game significantly. and is somewhat likely to happen, just don't waste the CP. Newer players use that Overwatch button so much more than they should. Same with the CP reroll; those are the biggest traps. You don't have to do that. Just save it for durability strats. Those are going to be a lot more important. Um, those are all kind of the multi-pillar stratagems that are global. You have the deliverability stratagem. That's the rapid ingress. This is probably the most important stratagem in the game if you have a unit that is depending on it um, to save the CP for. If you have a melee unit in reserve, you gotta just have that CP ready to go for rapid ingress. Nothing else matters because having that unit able to activate and able to ingress is going to change what that unit is able to do. It's also going to change by a margin what your opponent has to do in their turn. Their screening and their use of resources is going to be a lot more strained where they have to screen out the whole board, especially units with deep strike that can ingress. It gets awkward fast. Shooting armies should think about ingressing more. Generally, a shooting army's CP is less taxed than a melee army, and especially if you have like a deep strike unit, being able to ingress, move, and then shoot often extends your threat range to truly ridiculous proportions and allows you to get on objectives where you otherwise wouldn't be able to. Um, it's very important. CP for ingress. It unlocks all sorts of play lines. As far as durability goes, you have smokescreen and go to ground. Smokescreen can be very important to keep vehicles alive. Go to ground less so. Go to ground is kind of a, oh wait, I have a really important unit and I can go to ground. It's not something you have to plan around. Smokescreen is potentially if you have an army that's built for it. Often you'll have better defensive strats, but it can still be relevant to stack them if the game set that you're playing in allows that, the rule set, if your tournament's allowing you to double defensive strat. Insane bravery is another type of durability, just to ascertain that you get the value out of the unit multiple times. Um, you rarely have to save a CP for it because it's the first thing that you do in your turn. But if you know that you need a CP for another thing in the following turn, and you also know that you're probably going to need insane bravery, then make sure to set it aside. Think about it. Make sure you don't need it. Um, damage, grenade, and tank shock. Grenade people can overuse a lot as well. I think grenade is specifically relevant if you have a high toughness, durable target that has no mortal wound protection that is on 3 or less wounds. Otherwise, not sure it's too relevant. Same with tank shock. This is specifically to make it so that you can safely allocate your resources elsewhere and you don't have to be like, well, got this 3-1 thing, I guess I'll shoot 3 units at it until it fails an invul. If it's not in that specific instance, I wouldn't grenade. You're going to have better places to spend your CP. Epic Challenge is another type of damage, I suppose. I had a hard time kind of allocating this. I don't think it's deliverability because it's more about consistently removing important resources and being able to spike out an enemy character is very relevant. But it's only relevant if you recognize it is ahead of time. Most of the time, this is something that you can determine during your turn. If you have Assassinate up, or if you have, if your opponent has a unit that you don't think you'll kill, but removing the character removes a lot of efficiency from the unit, go for it. It's situational. Those are all of the kind of global strats. Of those, rapid ingress and is super important for melee armies, specifically having rapid ingress, counteroffensive, the CP interrupt, and heroic. Those are all very important. For shooting armies, if you have a unit that is made to Overwatch, keeping that Overwatch strat relevant, smokescreen potentially. Those are kind of the main things to have in your mind. So specific factions have a lot of different stratagems available. There is a lot that you can kind of focus on prioritizing. I'm going to hit on some of the more important ones, separated into those 3 different categories. So deliverability stratagems are often some of the most important stratagems and most powerful stratagems. because it extends what your unit is able to do in a lot of cases, and allows them to access deeper parts of the board and threaten your opponent in more places, which is great because your threat means that your opponent has to play around that, and you don't always have to actually use it, right? If you have a 6-inch deep strike strat and your opponent has to then screen 6 inches, and so they're stretching their whole army out and they can't go as aggressive, you don't even have to spend that strat. Your threat has limited their ability to play the game. Um, and that's good enough. The other types of deliverability, uppy downy, is a really important strat to keep a CP for. If you have it in your army and you depend on it to reposition, keep it in mind. Don't let yourself get to the end of the turn and not have, if you're playing, incursion demons, and you don't have that CP at the end of your turn, things are going to get pretty awkward pretty fast. So making sure that you have that should be priority number one. The last one I wanted to talk about for deliverability is advance and charge. Advance and charge is interesting because as a stratagem, you are extending your threat range by a lot, but it is somewhat inconsistent. Um, if a unit that cannot otherwise advance and charge is using an advance and charge strat, obviously if they don't use the strat, they can't do anything. So when you roll the advance, you are committing to using the strat on them, and sometimes you will roll a 1 on the advance and you will spend a CP to get 1 inch of movement. Now, sometimes you will spend a CP to get 6 inches of movement, which is insane value. So it's just inconsistent. And what makes that interesting is that you have to compare the relative value of advance and charge with potentially re-rolling a charge roll. As an example of some math that I looked at, if you have a 7-inch charge without advancing, if you use a strat to advance and charge, your likelihood of making that charge goes from 58% to 91%. So it increases your chance of making the charge by 33%. If you instead save your CP for a reroll, you increase that percent likelihood, or you decrease it to 25%. So it goes from 58% likelihood to 83 with a reroll. So going for the reroll charge is 8% worse, or 8% less likely to succeed than advance and charge. Does that just mean that advance and charge is better? No. The difference is that you might not need the CP reroll. If you elect to advance and charge, you are spending that CP no matter what. But there is a 58% chance if you go for the reroll charge play that you don't have to spend a CP, and then you get to have an extra resource later. So you need to think about the relative worth of the unit. Lots of times you just want that to happen, and you might spend the CP for advanced charge and save for the reroll. But if you only have 1 on your plate, maybe a 7-inch charge isn't worth it, but maybe a 6-inch is, and you would just go for that 6-inch with a reroll because you won't have the potential to save your CP until later. Whereas if you spend the advance and charge strat, it goes away. Am I focusing? All right. I think my focus, that's fine. We're out of focus for the rest of this video. Um, hey, the, uh, so thinking about like if you'll need to use the strat is important, because the cool thing about CP reroll is that you get to use it after you see if you fail, whereas advance and charge you have to use right away. So there is some consideration there of whether you actually want to use it or not. And that's why advance and charge on a data sheet or as an army rule is remarkably better than advance and charge as a strat, because there is no resource you're spending. You just, sometimes you go 1, but sometimes you go 6 and you're not spending a resource anyway, and so it just increases your threat range by a lot. With durability stratagems, there's a lot of them and they're all very relevant in different ways. The most obvious is just like a reactive durability strat, armor of contempt, or if you have a feel no pain strat or a minus damage strat, like reactive durability, where someone targets you and then you use it, is very strong, and it makes your opponent allocate resources as if you have that everywhere. If they want to kill the things they want to kill, they have to essentially put their attacking resources, considering that every one of your units has that defensive thing up, or they won't be able to kill it. And then you only have to use it on one of your units if you think they under allocated. Or you don't even have to use it at all. Again, the threat of these things is often more necessary or more powerful than the use of them. Um, by comparison, a defensive strat that is not reactive in nature is a lot worse. An example is if you, in Synaptic Nexus Tyranids, spend a CP to put a unit into 5-up invul at the start of your command phase. That is not that great because your opponent now knows that they have a 5-up invul and they can allocate the right resources to kill a thing with a 5-up invul, and it is not as scary as something that could have a 5-up invul if you decide you need to spend the resource for it, right? Um, the other type of non-reactive durability is regeneration, which is when done outside, when done on multi-model units in your command phase, is good for scoring primary. When done any other time, gets a lot worse because it's happening after the activation, and so you can just like die and then you're dead, and it doesn't make your opponent allocate that much differently, right? Um, the other types of strong durability, reactive moves and reactive charges, these are really just another example of something that you can have that forces your opponent to play around it, and then you don't actually have to spend the resource. Having reactive move up means your opponent plays around it and is really careful to make sure you don't get value out of it, and then you still have the CP. Reactive charge is the same way. It makes your opponent play all sorts of weird angles that otherwise they wouldn't need to. Um, Fall back and act is uh, very relevant to have, and making sure that you have a CP available to be able to do that is super important because you want to use your units. Using your units is good, and making your opponent feel uncomfortable with being able to stop that is important. Fire and Fade, save your CP for Fire and Fade, where it exists in the book still. Or hop back in a transport or stuff like that. Being able to get multiple uses out of your unit are incredibly impactful. It's an incredibly impactful thing to the game. Make sure you have the CP available to do it. Respawning full units, those strats are limited to once per game, but having the CP on hand, so if the unit that you want to use it on dies, you can respawn it. Fight on death is a really big one. I define that as a type of durability, but you it's another thing that you want to threaten because it makes your opponent play awkwardly, but you don't actually usually have to use it. It's usually better to save that CP. Just it forces your opponent to engage in awkward ways. In a melee mirror where you're just all melee, having 2 CP for interrupt and fight on death is pretty awesome. Where possible. So try to have that there, but otherwise it's just like awkward for your opponent to deal with. Sticky objective, both in your reactively, really good. In your own command phase, still solid, still a way to get duplicative value. But having that CP to sticky on death in the few detachments that can is really important. And the other one that I had is standing back up. Your models getting recursive value because you have a CP that just stands a whole character back up. That's pretty good. And if you don't have the CP active for it, you lose a lot of value, and your opponent gets to play around that a lot easier. The last type of stratagem, main stratagem type, is damage strats, and I just wrote rerolls, but there's all sorts, all the damage strats are pretty straightforward. They increase the damage of your unit. Um, just think about, like, is it going to change what this unit can do? Rerolls are the biggest example of, if you have a strat that gives rerolls, suddenly a unit that was not able to kill something might be able to kill that with consistency, and having that access is really important. But think about, before you use a damage strat, before you think I have to use this damage strat, like, what happens if my unit fails? What happens if my unit underkills? If they don't have fall back and activate, it's fine because I've tagged them. If they um, if they're a vehicle, maybe they shoot me at -1 to hit and then nothing else can. Like, what am I actually worried about not killing this unit, and what's the consequences of not doing so? And if they're okay, don't spend that CP. Save it, because there's other things that will be relevant later, I promise. um, that is, I mean, there's all sorts of different damage strats. I don't have to go into all of them. Some are worse than others, obviously. But knowing your micro really well, and knowing if this unit is going to significantly push the math to consistency and is going to turn what my unit is able to do, use that strat. If it's not significantly changing what you're able to do, don't worry about it. So, to summarize, our priority with our stratagem and CP usage is to save for stratagems that unlock entirely new play lines for yourself and disrupt your opponent's play. The best stratagems in the game are the ones that make your opponent have to play around them to do well, and then you don't even have to use them. And so you get to use that CP on whatever you want because you didn't even need it. You just need it to be there to theoretically use it, and then you're good. Um, Ingress, interrupt, overwatch, but specifically overwatch with a unit that is meant to do it, with a unit that has flamers or something crazy that will do a lot of damage. If your unit's not, if your unit's just Adorn, only Overwatch in combined arms if they are at low health and you need to kill that unit, right? Like, we're not just overwatching to overwatch here. If it's not changing the playline, don't worry about it. If it's a unit that does a lot of damage, we'd be overwatching. We'd be saving the CP to threaten it. Heroic intervention, 6-inch charge at a deep strike, or abnormal out of phase charges, and then reactive durability strats, reactive moves, fall back and act. All of this is important to save your CP for, because threatening it is wildly strong. You also want that CP reroll for charges. If you're a melee army, if you're depending on hitting a charge, save that CP reroll for a charge every time. And then the second, but still high priority, is generally just stratagems that make your playlines more consistent, and allow you to more consistently remove your opponent's resources, like advancing charges and better damage and stuff like that. Things to keep in mind is the order of strats and when they're going to come up. You can think to yourself, oh no, I need both reactive move and durability and fight on death on, you know, that, and interrupt on my next turn. That's 6 CP. I guess I can't spend anything. But realistically, reactive move happens first. So they will play around that. And then likely, unless they give you something insane that swings the game, you won't have to take it. And so then you'll have the CP later. And then if they play around your fight on death, you only need the defensive strat for melee, right? Like, there is a lot that you won't need to spend if you don't, if even if you have it all available, you probably wouldn't need to spend it. But just having the option to do each one at different times is very relevant. The other thing to think about is uh, your is potential vex on the board. If your opponent has vex available, watch out for them. because you need to take that into consideration. There's nothing worse than saying, I got my CP reroll for a charge, and then going to charge something with Vec that you forgot about, and just not hitting it, going, I'll CP reroll, your opponent going, you can't, you going, I planned my whole turn around this, I'm miserable. Um, just, that's a gotcha. Your opponent should be warning you, and you never know, so it's just keep it in mind. The last stratagem that I have not mentioned yet, which is completely unique and is outside the rest of this, is New Orders. New Orders is one of the most powerful and least powerful stratagems in the game because it changes your points pretty directly, but it also doesn't affect the board state in most cases. It affects what resources you have to use, but most of the time it's not actually affecting like who has what resources remaining at the end of your turn. I would say if you have CP available, use it. Use New Orders often and actively. On the first turn, if I draw 2 dead secondaries, I'll often redraw into another. Mostly because I know that certain secondaries are mostly not doable on turn 1, and I might redraw into one that I still can't do. But I'll get a CP for ditching either way, and I the ones that are hard on the first turn are still hard later. If I get bring it down now and I can't do it, that's fine. It means I'm gonna get the easier ones later, right? If I get bring it down later, it might also be annoying. It's gonna be a lot more annoying later than secure no man's land might be. So I'd rather just chew through the deck and get through the hard ones where I can. And armies that have a lot of CP access get a lot of advantage by hitting the New Orders button early and often. The exception to this, I would say, is melee armies and a melee mirror. You want your CP to be as high as it possibly can be when y'all's armies smack into each other. Don't spend the CP before that to redraw. Just take the extra CP and go into their turn with 1 extra. But otherwise, think through carefully what you have left, what you need, and then think, can I spend my CP on this thing and on New Orders and on X and on Y? And if so, do it. And if not, don't. Just prioritize the right things. Prioritize the things that make your opponent change the way that they can play the game. And New Orders, prioritize where you can. Armies that have access to extra CP are going to want it. Even armies like Ultramarines that have a lot of CP built-in generation and lots of stuff that they can do. People be spending their CP wildly, and you don't need to, because even if you're at 6 CP now, you go into next turn and you want to interrupt and armor contempt in another phase and -1 to wound and all this. Like, you never know how fast you can chew through your CP. Just because you have a lot doesn't mean you shouldn't just save up for more if you don't have a good reason to use it. So, be smart, think it through, and most of the time don't CP reroll unless it's a charge, and don't overwatch unless you're like a flamer or your unit's meant to do that. And you should be just fine, hopefully. All right.